Welcome, Peculiars. Welcome to the Peculiar Book Club. I'm Davey Berris, your co-host. Unfortunately, Brandy cannot join us today. She's actually probably stuck in an airport gate right now, waiting to board a plane to fly back to Cleveland. So you have me tonight. I'm going to be hosting with Lydia, but Brandy did leave us a little message. So let's take a listen. And you're going to see me clicking around the screen and doing all the things I usually do behind the scenes. You're going to get to watch me do it live. But let's take a moment to check in with Brandy and hear her message she left for us.
Hello, Peculiars. I'm sorry I'm not there with you live. I'm on a plane. But I really wanted to say thank you. Thank you for joining us for this wonderful season and being part of our Big Weird family. And thanks to Lydia, who's back again. I love Lydia, and her book feels so timely right now. I think it'd make a great Christmas gift, and we do have those signed copies at Loganberry, don't forget. I am also feeling like I should thank all of you for my present, because your presence has been my present. It's been wonderful to get to know you and to have this amazing club, and I can't wait for season 2, where it's gonna get stranger. We have some really exciting things coming up for season 2, including musical numbers, additional skits, more of Davey characters, and I really feel like it's an even richer environment because all of you are participating with us. And I wanted to say, if you haven't purchased a subscription yet and you want to get those extra shows, they'll be available till January 1st. And following that, you can register to the individual shows for free or by donation as usual. Subscribers, thank you, because you help support and make all of this other stuff free and available to everyone else. And that's really meaningful. I just guess I want to say thanks. I feel like this has been one of the best parts of my year, and I'm really glad that we could all be together in a place where, you know what to say. If you're weird, you're family.
Well, Brandy, you will definitely be missed. And, I want to take a chance right now to say thank you to Brandy. And from all the Peculiars, she has done an amazing job of leading us this first year, this first season of the Peculiar Book Club. I've seen behind the scenes, obviously, the hard work that she's put into this, the organizing this, the getting it going, the grassroots efforts. So thank you to Brandy. And I'm happy to be along for the ride, doing the engineering stuff, the things I do to support the show. So with that said, Peculiars, it is time to start filling up the chat. And welcome our guest, Lydia Kang. Welcome to the Peculiar Book Club once again. It's so nice to see you.
It's good to see you too. Thank you for having me back so soon at the end of the year.
Absolutely. And we are already warmed up. The conversation that's already been happening in the green room, we are ready to go and get weird with the Peculiars. So we're talking about your book, Patient Zero. And I think if anyone's been to the Peculiar Book Club, they know that this conversation can go all over the place. It doesn't have to just stay with disease and Patient Zero and stuff like that. We'll see where it ends up. I don't have any wacky characters for you this week, although I had an idea. We just, it was a tight week. I did have an idea of a sketch that involved Moses and Aaron and the 10 plagues and a whole thing, but we'll get into it. So, Patient Zero. I'll get the question started while the Peculiars fill things up. Where did the genesis of this kind of come from? When did you even start writing and working on this?
So I get a lot of questions on this because obviously this book is coming out during a pandemic, and a lot of people are like, oh, so you're like riding the pandemic train and writing about stuff that just kind of makes, and I was like, no, that's not exactly how it happened. So Nate Peterson and I had written Quackery, right? And it came out in 2017. And then we had been working with our editor, and we're just like trying to figure out another book. We switched editors, and then there was another editor switch. And finally we were like, okay, we have a great idea. Why don't we write about something? Why don't we write about Patient Zero stories? Like the stories of how a certain, disease had an outbreak on these shores at this particular time, but there's always some really fascinating kind of story behind it. And we thought we could like delve into the history of certain, medical diseases and, the science behind pandemics and infectious diseases. So this all happened in the fall of 2019. So we were like, okay, this is what we're going to write about. It's going to be great. It's going to be about pandemics. This is going to be awesome. And then as we're putting this like proposal together and we're like starting to really get the chapters, like what we're going to write about, like in January, I have an email to I don't know if it's to Nate and John or just to Nate, but I was like, hey, there's this little thing going on in Wuhan, China. Did you hear about it? It's like, it's on CNN. I saw it. There's like a little outbreak of something. And he's like, oh, that's interesting. We'll see if it shows up in the book or not. Like maybe we can use it as an example of
Oh
like
boy.
an outbreak, like how an outbreak gets researched, right?
That's probably how we all felt. I mean, at that time, yeah.
Yeah. It was just sort of murmurings. And then we were like, oh, it'll blow over and something else. I mean, like, Trump and everything political is just like all over the news. And so things were just getting blown by for like the most recent, interesting thing to come out of the White House. And so we were like, it's just going to disappear. And it did not.
Nope.
Not at all. And on top of all that, we wrote the book super fast. We were working so hard researching and writing because our editors like, let's get this out in the fall of 2021 when the pandemic's over. And here we are, our book released, and the pandemic is like not over.
Once again, what a probably universal feeling, right? We'll postpone that wedding till 2021. It'll be fine.
Be fine. Everything's going to be fine. We're all fine. Everything is fine. Yeah. That's not exactly what happens at all.
That was a good Han Solo quote right there.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So some of the peculiars are chiming in. If you missed the beginning of the show, Brandy is stuck at the airport. She knew she was going to be stuck at the airport. So unfortunately, we're missing her on the final season, or the final episode of the season. But she did send her love. And if you go back and listen back, there's a message from her at the top of the show. So it's me and it's Lydia, and we are ready to talk all of your questions. So go ahead and fill up that chat. I think Skywalker here already has our first question. Do you like how the book turned out, or would you have rather it been written over a longer period, not dealing with COVID?
Oh, that is a good question. I wish we hadn't had the crush of the stress of having to put this out so quickly. So that's one thing that was just really stressful to write it. We ended up putting a chapter on COVID in the book. And so because the book is about patient zero and sort of origin stories, we were kind of racking our brain like, how exactly are we going to talk about COVID in a way that's relevant to this book and it's not going to bore people, or it's going to actually be like accurate because everything was changing with COVID. And so we ended up writing about the origins of COVID and how the outbreak happened, how the US like kind of responded to it, how the WHO responded to it, how China dealt with it. And it's a messy chapter. Not that we wrote it messy, but like the unfolding was really messy. And so we had to tease through all that information. So that was really, really challenging. I kind of wish I hadn't had to go through that challenge because it is very weird to write about a pandemic in the middle of a pandemic when information is changing literally day by day. So that's something I kind of wish I didn't have to deal with. I actually wrote an essay about this like in August. There was a period of time, it was almost a year ago, it was during Thanksgiving of last year, where my husband had COVID. He was isolating in the basement because I was exposed to him. I was staying away from the kids, wearing a mask in my house. I was writing a chapter on COVID. My patients were all getting COVID. I had patients who didn't have COVID, but thought they had COVID. And so I was like constantly, on the computer, writing a COVID chapter, answering questions from my patients about what should I do? Like, what do you think of like hydroxychloroquine? Like, should I take doxycycline? What should I do? And I'm meanwhile like making meals for my husband, like holding my breath, running downstairs, giving him a meal, taking dirty dishes, going back upstairs, making sure he's not dead. Yeah. Like having him check his oxygen saturation, checking my COVID status online to see if my test is coming back positive. My son had just come back from college, and so he was quarantining in the house somewhere. It was the most surreal week ever, and not in a good way.
So, no, that sounds like a lot. Mm-hmm. Wow. I mean, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, obviously, besides being an author, you're also a doctor. You're a practicing doctor. Mm-hmm. So I mean, obviously the COVID chapter seems like it hit home really well. I mean, you were dealing with patients actually in the hospital. So not only were you doing the history of this, but you're also on the front lines of this at the same time.
I was and I wasn't. So I do primary care. So I'm the
Okay.
person who you go to see who tells you, go get your mammogram, go get your colonoscopy, time for your vaccine. When you're sick in the hospital, I'm not the doctor who sees you. Those are my colleagues. So
Okay.
I don't practice hospitalist medicine. So I don't like, I'm on the front lines in the as far as I still got to go to work during a pandemic. Like
Yeah.
there was no staying home for me. I mean, I did telemedicine for a little while, but like at some point in time, you can't constantly do telemedicine. You have to see your patients. You got to listen to their hearts. You got to lay hands on them. So there wasn't really not working for me. But I wasn't in the ER or on the inpatient wards where I was like masked from head to toe, that sort of a thing. So I had a different perspective on that as far as like patient care, but it was a little intense. I was like coming home and stripping my scrubs off, like as soon as I got out of the garage, putting them in the laundry machine, hitting like, the wash button. And then I would scream in my house. I'd be like, "Mom is home. Shield your eyes." Because I would be wearing nothing. I would run upstairs. I would like streak upstairs when my kids like looked away, take a shower. Because we didn't know in the beginning
Yeah.
how contagious COVID was. And so for all we knew, just like being in the hospital, touching the wall, like I could bring it home. And we didn't know back then. And so there was this ridiculous, it was comic, if not horrible, but it was comic for a while. My husband's an oncologist. So he's seeing like immunocompromised patients and stuff.
Yeah.
And masking and all that stuff. And so every time we would get home, it would be like, "Shield your eyes, Mom and Dad's home." And the streaking upstairs, my dogs were just like, "What the is going on with you guys?" It's so weird. And we have stopped doing that since, but it was a little weird.
All right. Well, so this doesn't have to be the COVID show. I figured
True.
I figured we'd probably open with that. But um to pivot onto some of the other diseases, what I want to ask you is, working in that setting and your husband also working in that setting, have you seen any of these other diseases? Because there have been modern outbreaks. You've
Mhm.
talked about some of them.
Yes.
Have you seen any of them? And we can kind of pivot onto some of these other diseases and some of the other things you wrote about.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of them. Let me see. I have friends and close colleagues, people that are close to me who worked on the biocontainment unit at University of Nebraska during the Ebola outbreak several years ago. So that was like very close to home for me. Didn't see them myself personally. It's funny because I have the advanced copy of this book that is, as you can see, totally earmarked so that when
Yeah.
I do interviews, I can actually look through this and know what I'm talking about if I have to like reference it really quickly. So I'm going to look through these and see how many of these diseases have I seen myself?
Yeah, so
Small,
I listened to the audiobook. I didn't realize,
yeah,
looking up the chapters, it's a very visual book. There, at least the opening of each
yeah,
chapter. Yeah, so if
yeah, yeah,
anybody
yeah.
did the audiobook like me, go back and take a look at some of the images.
So yeah, let's see. Okay, ergot poisoning. I have not seen ergot poisoning, but I have prescribed ergot. So there's something. Have not seen mad cow disease, but one of my colleagues, we were just talking about Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease and the cases that he's been seeing. So that's pretty close to home. Syphilis. I unfortunately
Yeah.
have diagnosed this a couple times this year in my patient clinic. Um, Syphilis is alive and well in the United States. So use
Yeah, I guess
protection.
the
Yeah.
STIs, those aren't going anywhere. No,
No,
they're
they're
not,
not going
unfortunately.
anywhere. Syphilis is such an ancient disease and it is still around. And it's like, man, that thing has staying power. I have not seen measles personally. I have seen HIV. Yeah, absolutely. So I have been a doctor a long time. About 25 years I've been a doctor. So when I was doing medical school and residency back in the I won't say early, in the late 1990s. I'm like trying to do the math. I'm like, oh my God, my math is bad. In the early aughts, I should say. In Bellevue Hospital in New York City, we had what was called a virology ward. And so that was where patients who had HIV and AIDS, if they got admitted to the hospital, they would be on the virology ward and we would take care of them. So I took care of a lot of patients who had opportunistic infections from HIV. And this is when some of them were on meds, some of them weren't, but we were still pretty much dealing with the aftermath of lots of HIV patients from the 1980s and 90s. Let's see, what else is in here? Haven't seen typhoid, lots of flu. Seen lots of flu.
Skywalker says, I've been listening to Dark History, and she did an episode on the Black Plague in like 1900. So the plague, it's something in the book. The plague has not completely gone away, has it?
No, there were actually 7 cases of the bubonic plague in the United States last year, like 2 years ago. So the bubonic plague still shows up in the southwest, usually, of the United States. But the bubonic plague, which we think of like, oh God, the Black Plague, Middle Ages, right? Killed half the population or whatever. Actually hit the shores of the United States in 1900 in San Francisco. So we have a whole chapter on that.
Yeah, and would you say that one is the most like recognizable of everything in the book? Is that the one that like first pops to people's minds when they think like ancient diseases, ancient plagues?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like the fact that we talk about plague, like we use it colloquially, like all the time, I think speaks to the fact that it's kind of like it's the king of the pandemics, right?
Yeah.
Avoid it like the plague. There's a reason why we say stuff like that.
Is it because it has good branding, like Black Plague, Black Death, or is it really because it was one of the most vicious?
It was one of the worst. I mean, it decimated the population, like something like, let me see, where are the numbers here? So the Black Death, I have cheat notes. Sorry about that.
It's okay. This isn't the quiz yet. The quiz is coming later.
Because there's a lot of stuff in here. So, so Black Death killed about 30 to 60% of Europe's population, and it took about 200 years for the world population to recover from it, which is a big deal. 200 years.
Yeah.
So it's a real big one, and there were waves of it. So there have been multiple Black Wave pandemics. The one in the Middle Ages is just one of them. There was the plague of Justinian, which happened, before that one, that would also killed a huge swath of people. That was during the Byzantine Empire, and it killed about a quarter of the world's population. So the plague is like, it's got street cred when it comes to, pandemics for sure.
All right, I'm going to let Chloe sneak in another question about COVID, and you keep them coming. Keep the questions coming. It's okay. Would you consider writing a sequel in a couple of years to include more examples and talk about how COVID has evolved by that point?
That's a good question. I could imagine writing like an essay about it or something. I honestly am afraid people would be like so sick of hearing about COVID that they're not going to want to read it. There's a little bit of pandemic fatigue, no matter what the pandemic is. So I can tell you right now that someone will write that. Yeah. It may not be a book, but it might be, it's definitely going to be like a journal article, but like that's going to get done. Probably not by me, but it'll get done.
Okay. All right. To pivot back to some of these other diseases, I was actually curious about some of the ones that felt like a misstep in the medical community, like cholera or yellow fever. As a doctor, was it hard writing those chapters where you were, the science, the medicine behind it, and you're writing about all these missteps that the medical community takes throughout the generations?
I think I'll tell you what, not necessarily related to missteps, but like one of the most painful things to read about is cholera, because it's so easy to survive cholera. Like cholera, when outbreaks happen, they just kill huge amounts of people. Like President James Polk, like finished up his presidency, and he did a little tour, and he caught cholera on the way, like through up the Mississippi and going back home, and he was like dead and buried in a mass grave. It's such an awful disease to imagine you just like pooping your brains out to death.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Are you guys eating dinner? I hope not.
I hope not. Yeah, not for this chat. Not for this book. No.
Never eat a meal before you when you invite Dr. Lydia Kang on the show, because I'm going to be a little gross. But so you poop your brains out. Literally, you die. Not your brains. I'm sorry, but you poop your life away. I should say that's more literal.
We get where you're going with it. Yeah.
Thank you for giving that bad metaphor. But it's so easy to fix. So if you take like a liter of water and you put in a half a teaspoon of salt and a couple teaspoons of sugar, maybe a squeeze of lemon juice for a little potassium or something, and you just drink that nonstop, if you get cholera, you'll survive, because the cholera, you eventually get over the cholera. Like, you build an immunity to it, your body sort of handles it. And what kills you is the dehydration.
Yeah.
So it literally costs pennies to save yourself from cholera, but they didn't know that back then. But nowadays there's still cholera outbreaks. Like, anytime there's like a major disaster in a relatively warm environment, cholera outbreaks will happen, because drinking water gets dirty, people start defecating where they shouldn't and stuff like that. So that's what really hurts me, sort of, as a physician, to know that there's something so fixable that can kill people still, you know.
All right, Mike, jumping back to our Black Plague conversation, says, we owe modernity to the Black Plague. It broke the back of feudalism.
Oh, I want to hear Mike talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, are there any of these diseases that you think, really changed the course of human history? I mean, I'm sure there's a couple of them. That's a big question. That's a little bit of a loaded question, isn't it?
That's a really big question. And I think there's also cases where human history changed the course of diseases, like, just sort of flip it on its back as well. Like, so a really great example of that is polio. And so, there were all these polio outbreaks after the turn of the century in the United States. So we all think of like FDR and the March of Dimes and all that kind of stuff. But polio outbreaks were happening in the early 1900s here and there. And people were just like, why is this happening? Like, why are kids becoming paralyzed? Like, for the last couple hundred years, like, we didn't talk about polio. It just wasn't a deal. And part of the reason why it was becoming a problem was because we were having cleaner water and better, like, more sanitary conditions. And what was going on was that when things were dirtier, per se, like, let's say you're a baby and you're born, your mom is nursing you. So you're getting sort of antibodies, against polio while you're breastfeeding.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's pooping and peeing and not washing their hands. And so polio is sort of just easily getting spread within the community. Baby gets polio, but guess what? She's got some antibodies and she gets polio, but she survives it just fine. And it goes through it goes through these younger generations really, really quickly, and they're fine. And when things got really clean, kids who were 8, 9, 10, they would get polio, but they didn't have any maternal antibodies left. And so, 1 out of 200 of them would have like an irreversible paralysis, which is what we think about the horrible stuff with polio. People didn't understand why these outbreaks were happening, and it was because we were cleaner.
Yeah.
Weird. You don't think about it being.
Yeah. Antibodies turn out can be quite helpful. Which is actually going to jump me. I'm going to jump all the way back because I was trying to move on from COVID. This isn't quite a COVID one, but Skywalker asks about any of the antis. I'm assuming she's mean anti-vax, maybe people criticizing the book. Did you get messages, reviews, etc.? I know a lot of people went against protocols during the flu as well as now. So this is an old argument.
So for sure, like there was anti-masking during the 1918 influenza pandemic. It's pretty funny to read that, because you're like, wow, some things really never change. Especially since we just got over that 100-year anniversary of the flu. I have gotten some Twitter messages about things like I'll tweet something and someone will just say, what they'll do is they won't say anything negative to me, but they'll ask me to comment on some information about COVID that has been thoroughly debunked, but looks very scientific, but is not actually scientific. Like they'll link me to an article that's not peer reviewed, that has a bunch of junk in it that's not valid. And so what I have done is I figured out how to like just mute them.
Yeah.
Somebody told me a long time ago, they're like, don't block, mute.
Right.
Which apparently is the thing you're supposed to do when the haters come after you. So yeah, that's happened. I don't read my reviews, and so I haven't read any sort of really bad stuff about it. It's been mostly positive, but I tend not to read my reviews very much because it's not really good for my mental health. So.
Yeah, it's a healthier way to live life.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think so. Mm-hmm.
Mike followed up for us. He said the drastically reduced population meant that the lives and labor of those who remained were much more valuable. Agricultural workers suddenly had bargaining power.
Oh,
and then he follows up with this, and I'm going to go for it, Mike. I'm going to go for it here. They formed anarcho-syndicalist communes. How'd I do? Think I got all those syllables?
I think so, but we won't ask you to spell it.
Yeah.
Put your hand over it and spell it. That is very cool. Thank you, Mike. That
Yeah,
is
thank you,
that is
Mike.
fascinating.
And
Yeah,
Chloe chimed in about the Broad Street pumps.
Oh, yes. We actually
Yeah.
have a picture of the map that Jon Snow drew that showed the Broad Street. So the whole thing with the Broad Street pump is in London. There was an outbreak of cholera in this little part of London. And Jon Snow decided to investigate, and he realized that all the people who were getting cholera, the vast majority of them who were getting cholera, that's it, Sam. That's probably why we didn't get it. Is that they were all clustered around a water pump that everybody was using for drinking water. And it turned out that there was a baby who got cholera. They don't know exactly how, but the mom did what most moms were doing at the time, and she like threw the dirty diaper out the window, and it landed. It was in a cesspit, where you're supposed to put the refuse, but they ended up digging up the cesspit, and they found that there were cracks in it, and it led to the water supply that was supplying the Broad Street pump. So Jon Snow was like, "You should boil your water." People were like, "You're crazy. Why would we do that? That is a terrible idea." And so what he ended up doing was he took the handle off of the Broad Street pump, so people couldn't use the water, and they're using water from places elsewhere. And the cholera thing, and then the outbreak ended. And what else was super interesting is that in that same area, there was a brewery, and the people who worked at the brewery could get free beer, and they were just like, well, I'm just going to drink beer all day. Like, water doesn't taste nearly as good. And none of them were getting cholera because they were all drinking beer. So that's like, another thing you could do is when there's a cholera outbreak is just don't actually do this.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that going to be the headline after this? Lydia Kang suggests drinking beer in pandemic.
Exactly. Yeah, more or less. But yeah. Don't quote me on that. But
speaking of beer, that reminds me, Brandy's drink. Brandy obviously wasn't here to kick off the show. And Peculiar, she comes up with a cocktail every week. And she came up with one this week. I'm going to read for you her description here. Our book-themed cocktail and mocktail will harken back to the days of old, when the principal beverage was wine or cider or beer. Some histories trace it back to second century Rome, where spiced wine was meant to fortify you against cold weather. But it turns up in cookery books in 1340, calling for cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, cardamom, cloves, and sugar. Since patient zero is all about the history of disease, we offer a little medical wine to warm you. So I don't know if you got the recipe out there. I don't know if anybody made it tonight, if they have their nice warm drink, but Lydia did help us pick the winning name. And the winning name is Bloodborne. Bloodborne is the winning name, which is appropriate. It made her laugh the first time she heard it too, I can confirm. So Brandy knows who submitted the winning name. And I'll text Brandy afterwards and let her know. If you're the one who submitted the winning name, message her on social media and she will get you your prize. I think some of our swag or something like that. So so I hope everyone's enjoying their warm drink tonight. Chloe says, I'm fairly sure the drinking beer or other alcohol instead of dirty water dates back a long time over here.
I think so. It's funny. I was reading when I read this book like a long time ago. I read The Thornbirds. You guys remember that? Okay, this is aging me a little bit, but it's like this epic book about people who live in Australia. And there's this one scene in it where they go to the sort of tropical area of Australia. And the first thing that this guy tells his wife is like, drink beer, don't drink the water because the water will give you the trots. And I was not Australian or anything, but I was like, I'm pretty sure the trots is bad diarrhea. But it was really funny because I remember reading like, okay, so apparently beer is safer than tap water in some places. That's good to know.
I think Susan was the one who submitted our drink name.
Oh,
congrats,
Susan.
It's amazing how that slang for going to the bathroom, it's pretty much universal, right? You kind of pick up what everyone's suggesting, no matter what country or slang you're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Here we are talking about diarrhea again. I'm sorry. Is that like the third time we started to bring it up? Possibly.
I mean, how do you as a doctor, how do you sift out some of these things? Because when you would list off the symptoms, I mean, there were a lot of fever, rash, diarrhea, a lot of these things tend to pop up in a lot of diseases. And I mean, it
Mhm.
sounds like the body basically goes in evacuation mode, no matter what you get. So how do you in the medical community as a doctor kind of decide these things, figure these things out? I know you're not, in the ICUs, but
So, like, when someone comes up with, like, a bunch of different symptoms, like, how do we figure out what it is?
yeah, I mean, how would they make that separation back then? I guess maybe.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I think that, back then there were loads and loads of historical references to, like, if you have X, Y, and Z symptoms, it's probably this. And if you have X, they're just patterns. And that's
Yeah,
what a lot of medicine is just a recognition of patterns. And I think that's also historically how people did exactly the same thing. Like they knew what the bubonic plague was. You got the buboes, you got those big
yeah,
honking, groin lymph nodes and, black spots that, that would like erode through. And if people kind of knew what it was all about, so it's again, it's patterns. If you don't know the patterns, everything looks horrible and scary, and you're just sort of kind of lost. But we all stand on the shoulders of people who've done this before and teach
yeah.
us. So yeah, it's kind of how it all happens.
Yeah, I definitely remember the tick bite, the bullseye tick bite from basically every medical drama TV show I've ever watched. That's
Mhm.
a classic one where the doctor's like, "Aha!" So
Lyme disease. Yes, I know. And oh my, I had to fight on that one because they kept putting the wrong picture of the tick bite in the chapter that we did that has Lyme disease in it on zoonoses. And I had to ask them, I was like, remove this picture, put in the correct one. Remove that picture, put in the correct one. Because I was just like, you have to get this right. If there's
yeah.
something medically wrong in this book, I'm gonna look so bad. So I had to like, I was such a nag on a lot of these things. I was like, you can't do that. You can't say that. You can't say it that way either. So
Nope. I understand. I understand.
yeah.
From an editor's point of view, I completely understand how everything has to be perfect.
Mhm, mhm.
Mike's chiming in. J.G. Farrell's novel, The Siege of Krishnapur, has a fascinating subplot about a disagreement between two doctors about cholera in 1857.
That
I'm
is
sure.
interesting.
Yeah.
There are a lot of fights about cholera because people were always they didn't know what it was. I mean, it took a long time to figure out what cholera actually was. Um, and the idea that it's actually caused by dirty water that you're drinking was, in the 1800s was like a very big deal. It was very, very, controversial. Germ theory, it took a really long time. It really wasn't until like the late 1800s that people were really kind of coalescing and coming together and saying like, yes, there are these microscopic things that you can't really see that are causing disease. And there were people who were like, you guys are full of it because I don't see any germs on here. I'm a clean person. Like they would literally have fights like that. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Was it a surgeon's hands are always clean or something like that?
Yes, a
Yeah.
gentleman's hands. A
Yes.
gentleman's
Of
hands are
course. Of
always
course.
clean. It's just like, yeah, where have those gentleman hands really been?
That the germ theory, Louis Pasteur, it's a running theme throughout the Peculiar Book Club, especially season one here. We've visited this time period a lot, and it does seem to be a pivotal moment in the history of medicine where everything changes. Or
Yeah.
everything starts to change at least. It took a while, but
Hmm. Yeah, that was, I learned something about Pasteur that I was really shocked about because everything I'd known about him was like, he helped create the anthrax vaccine. And I remember reading about, he did some of these experiments that proved that, germs existed and that there was no such thing as like spontaneous generation, that like mice didn't arise out of dirty cloths and, a couple of pieces of grain. What I didn't realize was that he was like, he had like a little scandalous cover up. Like I didn't know about that. Did you know about that?
no, no. I'm guessing. I'm sure one of the peculiars out there probably could tell us about it. We'll
Yeah.
see if they blow
Like
up the chat.
it was sort of surprising. So he like he kind of stole an idea. So he had an idea about how he thought vaccines worked and it wasn't actually correct. He said something about like if you have a bunch of bacteria and you just you make them multiply and multiply and multiply, and as every generation goes by, their exposure to oxygen makes them less virulent. And if you can use one of those that are much less virulent and you inject that into somebody, it can actually cause them to be immune to the original disease, right? It has nothing to do with oxygenation. It's because they just genetically change over time.
Yeah.
And some people were like, all right, I'm going to speed this up by just exposing the bacteria to like a detergent or a chemical that sort of kills it off or something like that, right? So he stole that from Jean Toussaint, who was doing the same stuff at the same time. And he was like, yeah, no, it's because of the oxygenation method. But he didn't tell anybody that he was using Toussaint's method. And he kept all of his records, all of his personal papers were under wraps, I think, because of his family, until like the 1970s. It was finally open to the public, and it revealed that he lied about some of these things. And I was like, bad boy. That's really bad.
Yes, that's one of, I mean, that's one of the hardest parts about history, is that we care more about the results than how you get there. And
Mhm.
so you can be remembered for, I mean, look, we still celebrate Columbus Day here in the United States, and we all know the history
Mhm.
there is not great. So it's
Right.
amazing how the final results are sometimes the things we latch onto when it comes to a historical figure.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was just talking to a friend of mine about this, how, people have come up with these results that have been absolutely groundbreaking, but didn't actually like like Pasteur created one of the first vaccines for rabies, right? He saved the life of a little boy by using a brand new vaccine for rabies. His idea of how rabies vaccine worked was completely wrong, totally wrong. But his method for making the vaccine worked. But
Yeah.
it's like he didn't know. He thought it was some sort of like alternate. There's a chemical in there that was like an inhibitor that allowed the vaccine to work so that it didn't hurt you. There's no such thing as that inhibitor thing. Is like just complete. It doesn't make any sense at all. But it's just kind of cool. It's sort of like you are very accidentally right, and thank goodness you were right, because it's
Yeah.
it's a good thing. But
Better lucky than good sometimes.
Mhm.
Kristen says this story was not in my childhood picture book on Pasteur.
No, it's not. He
And
did a lot of like, he did wonderful things, and we thank goodness we can drink our milk and not have it make us sick. Pasteurization is a good thing, but yeah, no, a lot of these stories are just sort of a little more complicated than you realize. They're not all just perfect heroes.
Susan, I
His
like
hands
his
were
hands
not
were not
clean.
clean. All right, so there's one thing we haven't gotten to yet, and it's the title of the book. It's the actual patient zeros.
Yeah.
Structuring the book this way, telling
Mhm.
their stories. What was that like? And I mean, I have a whole heap of questions on this, but we'll start with that. What was it like structuring the book this way and entering these stories this way?
Yeah. So this was our original idea. Was we're like, we'll call it Patient Zero, and we're going to talk about the people that were sort of pointed out as the person who started the outbreak or started a pandemic or something like that. And my first thought was like, that's a really catchy title. And then my second thought was, this is very problematic on a lot of different levels, because I was like, I didn't want the book to be about blaming people, because
Right.
the first person who is infected is not purposely trying to get infected to spread it to the masses. They're a victim, right? And so I didn't want to have this be about like victim shaming, like, oh my gosh, let's blame that one person who got Omicron and brought it to Europe, or like I didn't want it to be like that. And so the interesting thing is that that's what the title is, but as you read the book, you realize that it's not the point of the book at all. That
No.
it's so much more complicated, and that if we should be pointing fingers at anybody, it's at human civilization, because we're the ones that are creating the environment so that these patient zeros happen, so that zoonoses and spillovers from animals and bats and pangolins or whatever to humans that create these brand new viruses. They're not the It's not like us versus them per se. It's really us versus us. So it ended up being a lot more of a complicated dance to talk about each one of these stories, and how everybody looks at it a certain way, and it's not exactly that lens under which you look at it is oftentimes cracked and skewed.
Yeah, I think the HIV chapter, the supposed patient zero that you wrote about in that chapter, I mean, that's probably the best example of how someone really can get like, victim shamed or something like that,
Mhm.
for being the
Mhm.
supposed patient zero, even though they weren't. You traced it way further back than that.
Yeah.
And he really had a tough time with that.
Yeah, he did. And it's funny because I remember writing this chapter on HIV, and somebody said, "Oh yeah, like you have to read And the Band Plays On because it talks about patient zero and where HIV came from." And they said it like that because like they had read the book and that was sort of their understanding of it. And the book is a little bit salacious. It's very readable, but it paints Gaetan Dugas, who is he was the Canadian um, airline attendant who was considered the patient zero of the American HIV/AIDS pandemic epidemic. Like he was
Yeah.
labeled as the patient zero, and actually the term patient zero comes from him.
Right.
And but he is not at all the patient zero of HIV and AIDS. So what happened was, when they were trying to figure out, they were seeing all these gay men in San Francisco and elsewhere in the United States who were cropping up with these diseases that were caused by having a really, really suppressed immune system. So Kaposi sarcoma and PCP pneumonia, like all these different things. And they were like, all right, we're going to do some contact tracing and find out. They knew enough that it was probably spread sexually. So they were like linking all these people together, and they made this diagram that actually kind of looked a little bit like a COVID virus, So it had like circle here, circle here, circle here, circle here, and they all came to the center person in the middle. And that person in the middle, they didn't use their names, obviously, but they called that person because all the people who were affected were right now in like San Francisco. And
Okay.
so they called this one guy who was linked sexually to all these people, Patient O, because he was outside of California, whereas everybody else was inside of California.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
Patient O. And then after that article came out, all the different researchers and people who are working with HIV read the article, and they just kept calling him Patient Zero because it looked like they
Yeah.
weren't calling him Patient O. They were calling him Patient Zero. And that's how the term Patient Zero came to be. It's a mistake, actually. It
It is
sounds
a
like,
mistake. Yeah,
yeah.
but it's like kind of the perfect title though. I mean, it really does fit.
Hmm.
Yeah. Tracing
Yeah.
disease and stuff like that. The one that really hit me hard was I want to say was from the Ebola chapter about the African villager who like they quarantined him in his house, and like wha- something like 90% of the village ended up getting wiped out
Yeah.
from the outbreak of the disease. That one, because the family wanted to go through their traditional funeral rituals and they were all
Hmm.
touching the body. I mean,
Hmm.
that must have been a hard one to listening to it. You knew where it was going to go, but you didn't
Yeah.
want it to go there.
Yeah, exactly. Like reading it, you're sort of like, you know where the story ends, and it's not good. And the whole time you can almost imagine like watching the movie, and like they've done versions of this, all the time. But like, the funerary practices in some of those countries was you touch the body, you wash the body. I mean, this is touching people is like a normal part of life. But you can get Ebola just from getting those bodily fluids on your hands, and like that's it. Which is why when you see people who are in like biocontainment units of people who are taking care of Ebola patients, they are in biohazard suits and they're multiple layers. Yes, Ebola is absolutely terrifying. My friend Phil Smith, who is now retired, but he was head of the Nebraska Medicine biocontainment unit. And he was the guy where like if during the Ebola outbreak and there was a patient in Nebraska, he was the guy who was like in those CNN like
Yeah.
um, news conferences and stuff like that. And he would talk about like the doffing and donning procedures and like putting these head to toe things on. And you have another person next to you that as you take your pieces off, they're doing a checklist like take this off, wash your hands, take that off, wash your hands. And if you don't do it right, there's somebody on you to tell you, because if you get it wrong, you could die. It's just
Yeah.
it's terrifying. Um, it's funny because my understanding is that he'd been trying to work on that for years, getting that biocontainment unit, and people were like, "Why are you doing this? Like, this is like wasting money. We could use this for wars and stuff like that." And he was like, "It is coming. Like, you will see. We are going to need this biocontainment unit." And it turns out we keep using it a
Yeah.
lot, unfortunately. So
Yeah, actually, that one, Ebola hit home a little bit because I work at my day job is at a medical research university here in
Wow.
doing this kind of stuff. So I remember was it 5 or 6 years ago when there was a threat of it coming here, and for some reason our medical researchers were played an important role in it. And I remember like everything getting very serious very quickly and doing
Hmm.
special broadcasts explaining how Ebola spreads and things like that. And yeah, that one hit home a little bit.
Yeah,
Uh,
it
it,
really did. Hmm.
Liana says, as I was reading this book, I would give daily reports to my coworkers about the content. I inevitably ended my daily reports with the statement, "I have no idea how any of us are alive." Leona, I said the exact same thing to my family and friends. How did we survive, Lydia? How did we make it as a human race to this year?
Um, you know, on a lot of different levels, humans are actually really hard to kill. We're really smart and we are innate survivors. Um, we have generally really long lives and we have long breeding time. So we try to make a lot of babies when possible. This is before we were actually practicing any kind of contraception.
And before
that,
we
that
all got
worked. That
obsessed with
worked.
our careers and all that.
Yes. But there was a reason why people would have like 8 children and, 5 of them would die. But hey, you had 3 survivors that went on to have 8 children, but maybe only, 3 would survive. And like it kind of kept going and going. And, maybe the quality of life maybe wasn't so good, but um, but we are the ultimate organism. We are the apex predator on this planet, and there's a reason for that. And for a long time, like since we started becoming upright and our brains developed, like we outsourced, outpaced, outfought everything else on the planet. We still get killed by lions and tigers and bears, but like there's a whole horde of the other people like ready to spring up and continue and just be like, sorry about John, but let's just move on here and have some more babies. So yeah, human beings are pretty remarkable. We are, like I said, we are hard to kill for sure.
That was Mary Roach last week telling us about monkeys pickpocketing her while she was in India. So
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
we're not the smartest on the planet, but we're pretty good.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Now I know all the peculiars. We do not want to run out of time without running Lydia through our quiz this week.
Oh my God.
And don't worry, that it isn't too difficult here.
Okay.
But I thought of a couple of different ways of going with this. And obviously, infectious diseases and things like this, pandemics, are pretty popular in Hollywood.
Hmm.
They make a good story, as
Hmm.
clearly as an author,
Hmm.
Um, so first off, I threw out all the zombie movies. I mean, I'm sure at some point in the history of the Peculiar Book Club, we'll get to zombies.
Okay.
But I mean, I have to imagine when you see a zombie movie pop up, you're like, that's just an allegory for one of these diseases I've covered, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
probably. Probably. I have yet to write like a possible zombie book based on like real science. Like, how could that be? What would
Right.
make you crave human flesh? I'm sure I could come up with something, but
We know rabies will make you not want to drink water, but
Mhm.
crave human flesh, not yet. All right, so I call this quiz big screen patient zero. So I picked three movies, Hollywood big blockbuster
Mhm.
outbreak movies, and I want you to guess who the patient zero is in each story. I don't think I'll be spoiling anything if you haven't seen these movies. Most of them are very old because this is obviously the inciting incident, right? The patient zero in each movie. So, and peculiars, play along in the comments. Um, and we'll see how you do. Help Lydia out.
What's
So
really funny is that all of these movies, and I know the ones that you're going to probably be talking about,
probably
like I remember when I was going to write Patient Zero, and I was like, I need to watch all of these movies, and I was like, I'm in a pandemic. Why would I want to watch about pandemics? So I haven't seen any of them.
I haven't to be honest, I have not watched any of these either. But I did the
This is the
research
one
on
with
it.
Dustin Hoffman, right? Isn't it?
Yes, Outbreak is
I'm
starring
pretty
Dustin
sure.
Hoffman, Renee
Dustin
Russo,
Hoffman. Yes,
Morgan
Renee
Freeman.
Russo. She was,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know. So I'm
Okay.
gonna guess that it is uh
Would it be a teacher or maybe a
C.
Beyond Borders teacher, a U.S. military scientist, or a black market
I'm gonna
animal
say it's
smuggler?
C because C is the most dramatic.
She's saying C. Do the peculiars have
Am I
any
wrong?
answers? Are they still talking about zombies?
Let's see. Oh, Skywalker says C.
Mike
Am I
Mike
right?
says we damn well better get to zombies. All right. The answer would be yes, C, the black market animal smuggler. And I think
Nice.
Brandy would be proud. I think it was a monkey that
That's
they
the
brought over that bit him.
Yeah, that's the fiction writer in me guessing. I'm just like, yeah, they'd go for something pretty dramatic, and so
I
okay.
believe played by Patrick Dempsey in that.
Oh,
That has a cast that was very good for 1995, but a little questionable today. Cuba Gooding Jr., Kevin Spacey. We'll leave that alone. All right, question 2. Moving up now, in the 2011 thriller Contagion, a novel virus, MEV1, is brought back from China by this patient zero. Was it a businesswoman returning from a business trip? Was it a student studying abroad? Or was it a celebrity chef doing a publicity tour who came back and spread that way?
It is either A or C, and it's Gwyneth Paltrow.
Yes.
But I don't remember if I saw some of the scenes from it because I heard she was not in the movie very long, but she played her part relatively well. And I had heard that Contagion was really well done. And I heard that they had infectious diseases experts as expert people who are reading the script and like correcting stuff. So I heard it was really good and I should definitely watch it. And again, I was sort of like, I don't want to watch pandemic movies in a pandemic. I did see her in one of the scenes, and I saw her in a what do you call it, in a kitchen. So I'm gonna say a celebrity chef, but she could have just been a businesswoman who was just meeting the chef. So
Sky's a little unconfident. She's a student.
I think a businesswoman. I'm gonna say
businesswoman. Okay. The answer is. Oh, let me clear that comment really quick so we can all see it. The answer is a businesswoman.
All right, I got number 2 right. Yeah.
I was trying to think of a creative way to title this. I'm like, she's literally just, that's the description, a businesswoman.
Yeah.
All right. Our last patient zero, going back now in the 1971 sci-fi movie, The Andromeda Strain. Patient zero of the alien organism, because it's an alien outbreak, would it be A, the town doctor? Would it be B, maybe a farmer on the outside of town? Or C, is it a group of teenage boys who find, I think it's a crashed satellite, right?
I read this book and I remember being like, oh my God, Michael Crichton is a medical student writing this book. This is amazing. And I remember they used like somebody who had an absence seizure for one of the plot points because there were flashing lights and she sort of like froze. And then like this big mistake happened because she was sort of out of commission for a little while. And I remember thinking that was really, really smart. But that was also the year I was born, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Oh my God. I'm going to say it was a farmer, B, because when you're not sure on a test, guess B.
All right. She's guessing B. Peculiars, do you have any guesses yourself?
Yeah. Did you guys, anybody here read?
Kristen said, I've watched this one and I have no idea.
My God.
I don't know if it's the last one or this one she's talking about.
Did anybody read The Andromeda Strain? It's a good book, although I read it like 25 years ago, so I don't know if it's stood the test of time, but it was interesting back then.
I could see as an author where you would go with a farmer on the outside of town, but it was actually the town doctor. And they brought it to him and he opened it up and released the Andromeda Strain.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so, and there's a lot more to that story than that, believe me. Containment things and self-destructs, and it's a whole thing. All right. Well, that's our quiz. 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Not bad. I would say I mostly passed.
Lexi says it is a good book.
Yeah, it is a good book. It is really cool.
Sky always guesses C. Mike says when you're not sure on a test, go with farmer. Jennifer says, I freaking love this book. I listened to the audio and immediately started a second time when I finished. Wow, I never do that. So
you're probably talking about the Andromeda Strain, right?
Yeah,
if you're talking about Patient Zero, that's awesome, but it's probably Andromeda Strain.
That is some commitment if you're talking about Patient Zero. I needed a shower and after finishing Patient Zero.
I know.
Oh man.
Gotta love Michael Crichton though. He was like, patient, like doctor writer. He, I read a lot of his books. He was pretty awesome.
So,
So
one of the things we never get to talk about is your
yeah.
fiction. And
Hmm.
do any of these things, whether it's quackery, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, or Patient Zero, do any of these themes or things kind of make it into your fictional work?
Yes. So all the time, all the time. So in A
Oh, Jennifer
Beautiful
says your book.
Poison. Oh, that's so nice. And if you're lying, that's really nice of you. But I'm thank you. And we put you on the spot, which is really not fair. But thank you, Jennifer. Yeah. So my medical work and my sort of research for these things show up in my books all the time. I am a consummate poacher and parasite of my nonfiction work, and I stick it in my books all the time. So in A Beautiful Poison takes place during the 1918 influenza pandemic, because it's a fascinating pandemic. I put in Radium Girls. I don't know if you know the story about Radium Girls.
I'm not sure.
Oh, you guys should get the author who wrote Radium Girls, because
Okay. Brandy, are you listening?
yeah, because that's super cool. I don't want to say cool. It's super interesting. It's not cool. But there were these watchmakers who were using radium to make the dials of the clocks glow in the dark. But
Okay.
they would lick the paintbrushes to sharpen the point so they could paint very delicately on these watch dials. And so they were ingesting radioactive radium and getting these horrible diseases. So there's a character who's suffering from that in the book. There is the first.
Chloe. Chloe's been reading it right
There
now.
you go. It's really good, right? And then the first Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in New York City happens in 1918. So there's somebody who works in that office then they're trying to figure out like these murders and stuff like that. And the entire book was inspired by Deborah Blum's book. Have you had Deborah Blum on your show yet, or are you going to?
Not yet.
You
That
got
name sounds
to.
familiar though. Did I see it on season 2?
Her it might be on season 2. Her book is
Yes, January 27th. We will have
yes,
Deborah Blum.
she's written several different books, but this one is A Poisoner's Diary, Poisoner's Handbook. Excuse me.
Poisoner's Handbook. That's the book we're doing.
So good. That book basically inspired A Beautiful Poison, like start to finish. So that's one. Second thing is in The Impossible Girl, the history of grave robbers. That is what that's all about. Grave robbing.
We know a lot about grave robbing. I actually went as a resurrectionist for our Halloween episode this year.
Oh my God.
Another theme of season 1 of the Peculiar Book Club.
Yes. So that's The Impossible Girl. And then Opium and Absinthe is about opium addiction. All of that information came from my research of opium in quackery, which is I found out that injectable morphine was being used by the very wealthy because the syringe kits were expensive. And so oftentimes young, rich white women in the late 1800s were addicted to injectable morphine because they're getting their hysteria taken care of. So that's what Opium and Absinthe has, a character who's suffering from that. And I was also fascinated by vampires, so I threw vampires in there. Or are they really vampires? You don't know. And then the next book that I have coming out, The Half-Life of Ruby Fielding, is all about the atom bomb, but there's a lot of poison in there because I like poison.
Who doesn't?
To write about.
In a good narrative. Right. To write about. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, semen. Yes, semen can technically, they have documented Ebola virus in the vitreous humor of the eye as well as the semen. So it is technically passable through sex, but I don't know if that's actually been documented. But apparently it can last in the testicles and the eyeballs for some time.
There you go, Jennifer. It's never too late for a question on the show, although we are kind of getting to the end of our hour here.
Yes, we are. Mm-hmm.
And we want to thank Lydia for her time. And, if you're in the chat, we all miss Brandy. We all missed her this episode because she definitely does an amazing job guiding us and hosting us. So fill up the chat with comments for Brandy. She will definitely be seeing them and looking at them. A little bit of housekeeping stuff that I know she would want to do is she would want to remind you about season 2. And I am going to share my screen right now so that we can all take a look at this. But we have some exciting things coming up. So the Peculiar Book Club has the new updated website. And we have our whole list for season 2, and we're going to be doing the Raven Master with Lindsay Fitzharris and Chris Scaife to start things off. The Poisoner's Handbook with Deborah Blum will be our second episode in January. Organ of Murder with Courtney Thompson, The Wedge with Scott Carney, and that just gets us through the first 2 months. And you can be a VIP for season 2. There's 3 levels here. Check out the website. See what you want to do. There's bonus episodes if you get up to level 2 or level 3. There's tickets for all those upcoming events. You can still just keep getting tickets, the single tickets. The subscribers help us keep it free for the single tickets. And we are in podcast form. So if any of your friends are curious what the Peculiar Book Club is all about, you can easily say, hey, check out the podcast. It's a quick way to catch up on some of our past episodes. And if you're a podcast listener right now, listening to this, join us for the live show. You would be able to join in on the conversation with Lydia about Ebola, about Ebola and zombies and all sorts of weird things. And of course, we have the shop. We've got all the Peculiar merch. And you know what? This holiday season, you're buying so many things for everybody else. Don't you want to stop and get something for yourself? Don't you want to get a little something for yourself? So if you want a tote or a mug or a t-shirt, it's all there too. So I will stop sharing that. Lydia, thank you so much. Do you have any messages of hope to leave us with after learning about all these diseases as we go?
I do. First of all, thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you, everybody who came and chatted. So appreciate all of your comments and your enthusiasm. And thank you to Brandy. We miss you, but you will be back soon, which is going to be great. My message of hope would be, in researching all of these pandemics, I have found that at some point in time, they all quiet down and end. So COVID will come to an end at some point in time. May not go away, may become endemic, maybe something that we end up just sort of living with. But like, I think at some point in time, we're going to find some sort of normalcy again that hopefully won't require wearing masks all the time. I think it will come sometime, someday. I can't say when though. Yes, wash your hands. And yes, please vaccinate.
Well, absolutely. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you so much. It was absolutely wonderful getting to talk with you. And thank you to all the Peculiars for joining us. And remember, if you're weird, you're family.
You got the blue bottle blues when you wake up in the night. Don't make a big mistake, 'cause you can never make it right. When you reach out for the vial, feel the ridges in the glass. It's a matter of survival, baby, better watch your back. There is no antidote. There is no antidote. There